Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Of all the world's most famous fictional detectives, very few in Western fiction have done their sleuthing in China, much less 18th century China, until now. Local author Elsa Hart has parlayed her own international life experience into a nifty brace of novels about an 18th century Chinese librarian whose deductive reasoning talents put him right alongside Inspector Poirot, Sherlock Holmes, and even Charlie Chan. His name is Li Du, and his creator is Elsa Hart. Her two highly regarded novels are Jade Dragon Mountain and The White Mirror. She once lived in China, but now resides in St. Louis, and we welcome Elsa to the studio.
Thank you so much.
I loved your books.
Thank you.
I have to say that at the outset. Why 18th century China?
So it began with coming to St. Louis to go to law school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then ending up in China for 3 years after that due to my husband being a biologist who was studying alpine plants in the mountains of southwest China. So while I was there, I was able to travel a little bit, and one of the places I went was the Ancient Astronomical Observatory in Beijing, and it's a sort of square fortress-like building that stands in the middle of the city, sort of surrounded by a tangle of highways, but on the top are these replicas of astronomical devices that were made for the Emperor of China by Jesuits in China in the 1600s. So I visited and started researching their history and became fascinated with this period, the early 1700s, and the Jesuits in China.
Well, the Jesuits in China came as a little bit of a surprise to me. I suppose it shouldn't have, but the Jesuits and Dominicans play a key role in your work.
They do, yes. I hadn't realized that at that time, the early 1700s, China was still essentially closed to the West. And, you had the English East India Company really wanting to get in and start trading, but it had nothing that China wanted. And really the only ones allowed in were these Jesuits. And they had won their way in by convincing the emperors of China that they had technological advancements that would be interesting to him. And so had become, by 1708, technological advisors to the Emperor of China.
As you've indicated, the Chinese at that time were very, very suspicious of all foreigners.
Yes, with good reason, I think. And the emperor at the time, the Kangxi emperor, was had a lot on his mind. He was the second emperor of a new dynasty, the Qing dynasty, and he was very concerned about legitimizing himself in sort of the eyes of the people that his family had conquered. So he saw the Jesuits as a very useful way to help in this project of sort of legitimization and enhancing his authority.
One of the things I enjoyed most about the book was a whole refreshing new approach to the idea of a detective story. I mean, in a foreign land that we know very little about even today, and with a character who is quite different from most of the, quote, detectives that we read about.
I mean, it did end up being in this unexpected setting for me, but it started out with Agatha Christie. Actually, I was, we were in this sort of field station on the mountain, and it was quite high altitude, 3,200 meters, I think, which is about twice as high as Denver, Colorado. And I couldn't sleep at night because the altitude was affecting me. So I was actually listening to the BBC radio adaptations of Agatha Christie mysteries. And so I had these stories kind of repeating in my mind. And I was hiking around these mountains looking at these old trade routes between China and Tibet that still kind of contour these mountains, these paths. And I started wondering whether I could set a mystery on these trade routes in the mountains modeled on the same formula as Murder on the Orient Express. And so that's where the idea started. And that's not really what I ended up doing, but that was where it began.
And how did the character Li Du, the librarian of all things, come to you?
He, let's see, it started with, I remember it very clearly. It was a moment there are these very deep ravines and gorges up on the mountain, and sometimes you'll be sitting or standing on one side and looking across at the other side, and this cloud will kind of enter deep at the base of the gorge and then rise up until it blocks your view completely. And then these windows will open up in the cloud and you'll see just a tree or a rock across from you through the mist. And I always felt like those windows were kind of giving me a glimpse into another time. And I kept thinking maybe I'd see a figure, someone there, sort of across time and centuries. And that's how I started imagining Li Du. I then modeled him a little bit after a Chinese scholar named Xu Xiake, who used to travel through areas of China with maps and correct errors in them when he found errors in these maps. And I read some of his writing and found some of Li Du's voice there.
You paint wonderful pictures of the terrain that you just partially described here a moment ago. It must have been very impressive to you to have drawn these pictures.
Thank you. It was such a privilege to be there. The natural beauty of that part of the world, sort of the southernmost tip of the Himalayas, is really astonishing.
And of course, the problems between China and Tibet, which exist still today, worked their way into your stories as well.
It did, especially into the second book, The White Mirror, that this great rivalry between the Emperor of China and the fifth Dalai Lama, who's known to history as the Great Fifth, and how some of those early relationships and conflict between the two powers really had their origin in this time period.
Tell us something about the structure of society in the period of which you write.
The period in which I write is, we have this new dynasty, the Qing dynasty, and that has this centralized power in Beijing. They had at this point moved the capital from the southern capital of China to Beijing. So one thing that I was quite concerned with and thinking about was the way the emperor was trying to define the borders of the empire and exert control over these very distant borderlands where, most of the population were ethnically and culturally very different from those in the north, so speaking different languages and having different priorities. And so what the emperor was doing to try to make his authority project that far was a lot of what I was thinking about and researching.
What about the classes of society? I mean, certainly we have the royal class, of which you write, but there are plenty of other folks there as well.
It's true. It's interesting. I mean, I enjoyed setting my. I wanted to find things that a contemporary audience could relate to. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I was looking for was actually things that are kind of fundamental to humans and humans interacting, and weren't even so specific to the history, that you get to these rural places where people are struggling to communicate with each other, and a lot of the interactions don't look that different from what they do today. You eat together, you try to establish some sort of common ground, and go from there, really. So certainly, what was defining this area was very much the subjugation of these local ethnic minorities by the Qing majority.
There seemed to be a great deal of feeling for the supernatural, if you will, amongst your characters. That became a big part of it, demons and things of that nature. Yes,
that did become a big part of it. I'm so much more a storyteller than a historian, and those folk tales and fairy tales and elements of the supernatural were just irresistible to me as I came across them in history and started to develop these characters with very, very strong beliefs.
What resources did you have for your research?
So I did a lot of my historical research in the U.S. when we would come back, for holidays. So I was, or during my final year of law school, because I had very little social life. I would, between classes, be in Olin Library at Washington University, using, the fantastic resources there. Also resources at the Missouri Botanical Garden. So a lot of history books. One of the top ones being a book by Jonathan Spence that translates poems and edicts and letters by the Kangxi emperor, and then orders them in a way that gives you a lot of insight into his character. So that was a big resource for me, that book.
Was your legal education any help to you in becoming an award-winning writer?
It was definitely a help to me. I mean, unexpected trajectories in life. I hadn't intended to turn it toward a career in writing fiction, but so much of what you learn in law school is how to take this infinite number of facts that are present in any given situation and select the ones that are relevant and turn them into a narrative. And that is certainly applicable to writing fiction as well. And so I learned that discipline.
Of course, living in China was helpful to all of this, needless to say, but you've lived in a number of interesting places. How does it happen that you've lived in the Czech Republic and other places?
I'm so lucky that I moved around a lot as a kid. My dad, when I was born, my parents are both from the U.S., but my dad was the foreign correspondent for U.S. News and World Report magazine in Rome, so that's where I was born, and then later, he was in Moscow, so that's where I was as sort of early childhood. And then for high school, we were in Prague in the Czech Republic because he was working for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Really?
That was what took us
my
around.
brother was also associated with those organizations.
Oh, really?
Perhaps they knew each other.
Oh, maybe they did.
Yeah. Well, does the fact that you've lived in so many interesting places over the years, is that going to inform future work from Elsa Hart?
Absolutely, I think so, and I hope to continue traveling and being inspired and maybe go back into more memories from childhood and from the places I lived and the stories I was told. So I look forward to going all sorts of different directions in the future.
It doesn't sound like you're going to spend much time in a courtroom.
I don't think so. I think I've taken a pretty strong swerve in a different direction at this point.
Right. What are you working on now?
So I've just completed work on the third book about Li Du. It's called City of Ink, and it's going to be out in August. And it brings Li Du back to a necessary confrontation with his past and to his home and his library in Beijing, and sets him a new task to solve there. So I'm very excited about that. But I have just finished it, and I'm now turning my attention to the very early stages of a fourth book that will be set in London.
How long does it take you to put these together? I mean, you write beautifully, but the books are of some length, 300 pages plus. You're banging them out like crazy.
It's been speeding up. The first one took me about 3 years, and then the second one about a year, and then a year, and the third one a year again. So definitely getting through it the first time and having a lot of false starts and learning a lot has made the second two easier, and knowing my characters already.
What is the process like? I mean, do you get up at 5 a.m. and write for 4 hours and then take the rest of the day off?
I do. I try. Well, I try to treat it pretty much like a work day and start in the morning and cut myself off in the evening. But it is difficult because you get so immersed in this world, this imaginary world. It's hard to exit it.
One of the things that I liked about the books is the fact that when the mystery is solved, the book continues and it creates a kind of a postscript to all of this that is fascinating and kind of looks like it's going to lead to a sequel.
Good. I'm glad you enjoy it. It is. I think that has some to the fact that it's historical mystery and not just straight up mystery is part of why I have to get in this extra content. So many mysteries are able to really end with it, and this is the person who did it, and there's no more after that. Whereas I had sort of other things I neneeded to wrap up.
How did that come to you? I mean, that is a little bit different from most of the books of this genre.
Writing in a historical?
Well, yeah, detective stories, for lack of a better word, for continuing the story beyond the solution to the mystery. I think
it does have to do. I mean, I consider myself a mystery writer, and I love mysteries. I always have, and I respect the formula of them. But I did want to, a mystery. Some of them, the sort of cleanest, most old-fashioned mysteries are almost like math problems. They're puzzles, and then you put just a gentle layer of human personality on top of that. And I just wanted to to layer in a little bit more of human motivation and contemporary relevance and historical content to the book as well, so that just expanded it beyond the formula of mystery a little bit.
One of the questions I had in reading the second book, The White Mirror, was the constant references to butter tea. What the heck is butter tea?
Butter tea is in full yak butter tea, and yak butter tea is very important in the Tibetan area of this part of the world, and what it is you take very strong tea and steep it for a long time, and then you add to it or you churn into it yak butter, which has a very sort of cheesy, musky, yucky kind of taste. And then
whatever that is,
it's very strong butter, and then salt, and it creates this very energy-giving, warming drink that is traditionally has formed a huge part of the diet there.
Have you tasted it?
Yes, yeah. Yes.
Because the characters all seem they were consuming it all the time.
It's that was written from experience. We some of the work that we did with our botanical collaborators there was sort of deep into the Tibetan cultural sphere, and we were making it up and down the mountain every day on yak butter tea and not very much else.
And does it work? Does it give you that additional boost?
It really does. It was like a Popeye spinach effect. Like you could feel like you were too cold and tired to possibly move from the ground, and then it really would get you going and sustain you for hours.
What's going to be the title of the book that is coming out this summer?
City of Ink.
City of Ink, yes, you already mentioned that. And the one to follow, do you know yet?
I don't know yet. I'm excited to find out.
Well, I definitely am going to be looking for City of Ink. Elsa Hart, as I said, I enjoyed your first two books, and I'm sure I will enjoy the third and the fourth.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun meeting you. It's great to have you in St. Louis doing your thing.
I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.